Hello.
You're listening to The Beautiful Idea,
a podcast from a collective of several anarchist and autonomous media producers scattered around the world.
We're bringing you interviews and stories from the front lines of autonomous social movements and struggles, as well as original commentary and analysis.
Follow us on Mastodon and at thebeautifulidea.show.
Thanks for listening.
All right, hi. I'm here with Dean Spade, author of Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, and Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of Law. He's just published a new book called Love in a Fucked Up World, How to Build Relationships, Hook Up, and Raise Hell Together. Thanks for being here, Dean. Would you like to introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you. What else is there to say about me? I've been doing things in movements for trans liberation and racial and economic justice and against militaries for about 25 years in different parts of the U.S. primarily, and spend most of my time these days in Seattle on Duwamish land.
You're actually the reason that I didn't go to law school, so it's an honor to be speaking with you right now.
I love it when that actually works. Almost everybody's like, who I feel like I said that to still goes to law school. So thank you so much for listening.
No, it's great. I had a close friend in college who was also looking at law school and then found your work, and she started circling it around, and here we are doing very different things with our lives now. So not to discredit, we do need movement lawyers, but I really appreciated your guidance in my early 20s. So thank you for that.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. I see references in your new book to a lot of lessons I've picked up over the years from writers like Carla Bergman, Nick Montgomery, Clementine Morgan, Miriam Kaba, Jessica Fern. And I really appreciate the way that you weave together the personal with the political in the way that I see a lot of those writers doing, especially in this new book. So I want to talk about that in a minute, but first I thought it would be good if we could provide a little bit of background to listeners on some of your other work, since The Beautiful Idea is an autonomous anarchist podcast, and we cover a lot of mutual aid efforts around the country and the world, including some of the incredible work that's been happening recently in response to climate catastrophe in places like Los Angeles and North Carolina. And I heard you give an amazing anti-lib rant on another podcast previously, and so I want to make space for you to do that here. But right now, and we've been talking about this a lot on our podcast, it's just like the new context in light of the Trump regime. But we're seeing what happens when people think they can rely on the system to change the system. And in a time of increasing cuts to social safety nets, a lot of people might feel an increasing desire to lobby the state for better welfare policy and support. And so I wanted to ask you, how, since you've written so much about mutual aid, how do we balance the urgency to get our needs met without reifying dependency on the state? And what do you think are some of the opportunities and risks of this particular moment?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is so bad. I was just texting with my friend who has been doing, direct legal services to people on public benefits for years and years and years, probably for 20 years. And he was just talking about the significance of what it's going to mean for 7,000 people to be fired from the Medicaid system, and just like how many people are going to die from the kinds of slashes to poverty-related services that are already so weak and thin and exclude so many people and give such like incredibly low benefits that you could never live off of them. But even like the further destruction of that, like thin, inadequate safety net is like, really deadly. And I think it can be easy to have the response to that be like, we need to ask them, don't cut it, right? Which I think, hasn't been working for all of our lifetimes, right? Like it's like the Republicans and the Democrats have both been like completely united in criminalizing poverty and like making it harder and harder to get the basic, really crappy welfare benefits that exist, and adding lots of like stigmatizing ideas around them and like stigmatizing like work requirements. It's just like everyone in our government is like down with that, and now we're seeing like a really terrifying speed up of that process that's already been happening our whole lives. And on the one hand, what I hope is that people will be like, wow, there is no getting anything out of this government. There's no getting anything out of this Supreme Court. It is, our opponents have it locked down. Could we finally return our energies to caring for each other and fighting them directly instead of asking them for things like, what do they have to look like for us to stop orienting towards moral persuasion as the technique, it feels like, hopefully, right, like maybe more people, and that happened last time Trump was elected, there was a real turn towards, well, it was complicated in 2016. On the one hand, I think I was really frustrated, and this is part of what led to me to writing the book Mutual Aid. It felt like there was like a message coming in 2016 from like Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and stuff, like we've got this, like donate to us, and like the ACLU had like these really irritating things on its website, like click here to say you support the Constitution, like just like directing people who are appropriately terrified and scared and angry to meaningless symbolic action and then donation, right? And for me, that's really scary because people there's those moments where more people are mobilizable, and we really want to invite them to like action that will feel satisfying to them, connect them to more people, help them grow new solidarities, help them learn new ways of understanding what's happening, that our movements have been, generating that analysis, instead of just directing people to more kind of like meaningless action. So I feel like, 2025 is another one of those moments where a lot of newly scared and angry people are like, oh my God, like what is happening? What do we do? And where I really want us to really, invite them deeply into direct action and mutual aid as the responses. On the other hand, so on the one hand, it's like, okay, it's a moment where it's a total dead end to appeal to the government. Maybe people will join us in direct action and mutual aid. On the other hand, these are also moments where the Democrats and liberals regroup and they move further to the right, because all they have to do is distinguish themselves from Trump. So they're all, this is what happened last time. Like one of the moments of this for me was I was living in Washington State, and the Washington State electeds had like a joint press conference that was like, the mayor of Seattle, who was, and part of building this horrible youth jail that we were fighting, and the governor, and all these people who are all doing like these horrible anti-poor, racist, terrible things. And they have a press conference, and they declared Washington a hate-free state. And they like decried Trump and like talked about how they love trans people and Muslim people. And like literally, these are the exact same people who are killing trans people and Muslim people and poor people and everybody. But they can just like, it's like this low hanging fruit where they can just be like, we're not Trump. And this idea of a hate-free state, utterly meaningless garbage, like there's no like enforcement power. It has no relationships to any policies that they're actually doing to our communities. And so to me, like that's a scary thing about this kind of moment, is it can be a yucky regrouping for liberals and Democrats, because like any alternative looks amazing compared to this like openly like racist death cult, genocidal nightmare. Like a softer genocide looks, like somehow appealing maybe to people, or like, so it's hard. Like it's a really difficult moment where like our job is to meet people in the kind of fear and like the kind of awakening for a lot of people, like fear and anger that this like explicitly horrible regime can bring out, and like the feeling of like hopelessness that people are having, I'm hoping can be an actual grieving of illusions about what can happen under a colonial government here in the United States. Like I would love for people to be like, oh my God, like, and for the whole election, I hope is like a death knell for liberalism. People are just like, oh my God, the Democrats are a bunch of imperialist, xenophobic, awful people too. Wow, is there anything else? It's so hard to face my fear around it's just us, we just have each other, when I've been told my whole life not to trust others. Can I get together with others and form a faith in our goodness and in our courage and care for one another, and learn about how people have fought back in the past and are fighting back all over the world, and not instead think my only hope is appealing to, a system that has just continued to deliver the same downward spiral my whole life, to the point where we're, facing extinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. It makes me sort of wonder about, what you're saying about funneling people into sort of meaningless actions, like with this thing with the ACLU that you mentioned, or sort of public spectacle that ultimately doesn't actually change anything on the ground. And I'm hearing more and more people talk about the need to move away from sort of symbolic actions and more towards, with an awareness of the real risks that people are running, and people are talking more and more about the importance of moving out of doing actions that are going to wind up in like purposeful arrest and instead into things that maybe require more risk and more trust. But it's interesting to think about, like, how do you actually cultivate that kind of discernment with people, especially people that are just moving into these spaces? And I don't know, it's also an opportunity to just sort of reflect on like what actually radicalizes people and how do we cultivate those opportunities for people. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts about that question, and also if you could talk about what radicalized you. I know you talk some about it in the book. You share a lot about your own in your new book and in your previous work. You talk about your own personal experiences, but I think that's helpful as we're talking about this question of like cultivating discernment in people and bringing people into more radical spaces.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a hard question. Like, what helps people get in? I spend a lot of my time directly supporting like groups of people who are doing mutual aid work or who are doing chapter-based work. Like they're a chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine or Dissenters or Jewish Voice for Peace, or some various small groups, or they're doing like direct support to unhoused people in their towns or direct support to people in prison or whatever. And in all of those groups, we have a lot of deep conversations about how to keep bringing new people into the group, right? A lot of groups get kind of like frozen. Like there's like a certain number of us, and then we're so focused on this very high, inevitably any work we're doing, the level of need is enormous. And it can be hard to remember to do all the extra work to be like, let's have an orientation for new people. Let's figure out what welcomes them. What's going to attract them? Is it going to be a cultural event, a film screening? Is it going to be a meeting about this particular thing? Should it be indoors or outdoors, daytime or nighttime? Like what will get more people? It's just, we live in like a avoidant, antisocial society, and even people really, really, really care about something, they have a hard time making themselves go out and do something about it with others. There's lots of like fear around other people, and people are a lot of people feel very burnt out and exhausted, I think, because of the media context and like the doom scrolling, and that also like working a lot to pay the highest rents that have ever existed on the planet. And so like it's very hard to just first of all figure out how to get people out of the house or out of into the whatever the venue or situation that you're organizing people on. And then the second piece is like how to get them to keep coming. Like sometimes I was just meeting with a group that has had like about 250 people like really come to something and join this one particular signal thread and like really engage at least once. And even just getting those people to come back, right? Like, and that's people who already did maybe the hardest step of like joining a group for the first time, potentially, right? That means they were highly motivated and also took the kind of like social and emotional risks. So I think this is a really big question. And one of the things we need is to be like, we're just going to relentlessly invite people, and we're not going to take it personally when they don't show up again, or when some of our events didn't get not a lot of people came. Like we have to be pretty like resilient, and I think part of that is with each other. Like in our groups, we have to like cultivate like a kind of like joyfulness and ability to like find satisfaction with each other, even if not all of our events go well or are popular, or even if we get stumped for a while. Like how do we stay with it? I think a lot of people, also because our culture is so avoidant and antisocial, will be like, I tried activism once and it didn't work, or I tried transformative justice once and it didn't work. Like, I hear things like that a lot, and it's like, what? No one's like got a perfect formula here. Conditions are horrid for everything we're trying to do. So how do we, like stick together and be playful as much as possible about it? And like, yeah, we got to make stuff meet people's social and emotional needs, be fun, like feel like you might meet friends there, feel like people might listen to you there, like just inviting people to boring meetings where they don't totally know what's going on or where they weren't caught up, or, like there's got to be like, people try a lot of great stuff, like have a buddy system so that someone really welcomes you in and follows up with you after, have special orientation meetings, make sure there's time for people to really say why they're here. Like this might be their first time getting to talk about these politics with other people who understand, like, just like, use, like, do things that are culturally pleasurable for people, like include dance or food or song or prayer or whatever that community is into, like just all of those pieces. For me, what got me politicized? I mean, I grew up in a context where I felt very critical of what was going on around me. Like I was living in the 80s in like rural central Virginia, and it was like very extreme like racism and like racial segregation, like inside my school bus, inside my school, like those kinds of pieces. And I was like, my mom was poor and we were on welfare, and like I was aware of like bad things happening to her at the low wage jobs she had. And I was aware of my own like class status. And, you know, as me and my sister and my mom were like cleaning people's houses, and some of those people went to my school. And like, I was just very aware of like those class differences and the kind of like various humiliations that circulated around that. And I was, you know, as I came into adolescence, very aware of like all the sexual violence and sexism in my peer group and, you know, happening to me and all my friends. And like, I think that was the first thing that politicized me. I mean, I had a sense of being like different and pissed and outside in certain ways, and also like wanting to fit in, that kind of combination of things. And then I think in my teens, I like, because of the wonderful lyrics of a Salt and Pepper song, I like had a feminist awakening, like in the middle of the night, about like some things that were happening in my social circle. And then like sought out, like I like went to a library and like read Roe versus Wade. Like, 'cause I was like, what is feminism? And I like, you know, found some random book on like women and spirituality. And then like somebody gave me Backlash by Susan Faludi, and I read that. That was actually really helpful because it was just like a more like overtly sort of like a book about the political culture. And then eventually I like left home and found queer, found out that you could be queer, and, you know, and then sort of built from there. Eventually I, like in my late teens, I was living in New York City, and, you know, Giuliani was mayor, and that was where I really like met people through my retail and nightlife jobs, and like got involved in like a radical, like, you know, multi-issue anti-Giuliani sort of political genre that was happening there, where I was learning about like what was happening at Rikers, and like what was happening with the zoning out of sex work out of Times Square. And, you know, I was working in bars that were being raided by fire marshals because Giuliani was like trying to close gay bars. And I was like, you know, learning about the whole history of AIDS activism, working with a lot of people who'd been in ACT UP, and like understanding more about police violence. You know, like things were like kind of, there was a, you know, the taxi drivers were in a battle with Giuliani, and there was a lot of stuff about the mental health system and about like the welfare system. We were doing a lot of protests about the welfare system and how it treated people with AIDS. There was like, you know, kind of, it became, things started to come together for me. That was like the mid 90s. It's like, you know, welfare reform and immigration reform in, you know, under Clinton. Both my parents were immigrants, and my, you know, I'd grown up on welfare. So I felt like some kind of like connection and identity with like what was happening. And the interesting question related to like right now is like, why did I go out and do stuff about it? Like, that's like, I really can see how compared to now, if you were interested in something, you had to literally go out and find people, because there wasn't an internet context you couldn't take kind of symbolic action on the internet and feel like you'd done something and like you'd been seen and heard, which like you just had to either like find a group. And also like, yeah, like when you, like, if you left home, you couldn't like really stay in touch with people from back home. So you had to go find new people, new peers. Like, I think now a lot of my students, they stay in touch with their friends from high school or their friends from college, and they're like not finding a new group. They're not like, oh, I have to go to this like goofy dance or this like weird art club or something to just find some people. And so their lives have less relationships in them, and less like local relationships that have depth, where someone might like care for you if you were sick, or like support you if you're in a relationship crisis. Like, I think that the lack of technology back then, like pushed us towards each other in a different way. Obviously there's ways in which the first trans people I ever met were online. I'm not saying that's bad to meet people online, but there was like a kind of necessity for like joining groups that I think is different now, and our lives are mediated by being social online. And I do think that can discourage people like joining up with people and taking the risk and being like, some of these people aren't like me, or none of them are like me, or what's it going to be like at this meeting? I have to go by myself or just with one friend. Like, taking that social risk, I think, has become harder, and like we're out of practice.
Wow, that's a really good point, and makes so much sense. I think your other work focuses heavily on the differences between abolitionism and reformism, and the importance of abolishing prisons, what intersectional organizing can look like, why mutual aid is critical for collective liberation. And your new book is really distinctly personal. And I think this sort of speaks to something you were saying earlier, like, how do we meet people's social and emotional needs? And you market this new book, well, I don't know if that's how you're seeing it, but I've been listening to some of your other interviews and read the book itself, and like, you market it as a self-help book for radicals, right? And I'm wondering why you chose to write about interpersonal relationships and patterns, and how you're linking this with your previous work.
Yeah. I mean, I for me, they're all the same project, right? So like in normal life, I'm talking about this question, like, how do we have movements that actually make change, and what are some of the obstacles to it, right? So I'm talking about the ways that like the neoliberal context, like a certain kind of trans politics is emerging in a neoliberal context where there's this blueprint of this gay and lesbian rights formation that's pro-police, pro-military, very much aligned with capitalism, has like an illusion about how like changing the law changes people's lives, and about like, equal opportunity and all of these other very conservative concepts. And I'm saying like trans politics should not follow this blueprint, even though people assume that it is like sort of the forgotten stepsister that should be brought into that. And I'm so basically asking like, how does change actually work? What are some of the illusions about change under the racial capitalist context of the U.S., the colonial context of the U.S.? What are the illusions about the law system here, and what actually works? And I'm saying like formal legal equality, as critical race theorists call it, doesn't work. It doesn't deliver the goods. We can see that from all the different groups of people that try to avail themselves of that and still remain at the bottom and the most criminalized, etc. And we should instead orient towards like actually changing what people's experiences are, not changing what the law says about us. And so I'm directing us towards mutual aid and abolition, like destroying these systems rather than trying to be like recognized by them. And then in the mutual aid book, that book really came out of watching the moment of the first Trump election and being like, oh my God, like people have been so lied to about what social movements are. So then when they do feel pissed and scared and they go to do something, they can be duped by the ACLU into clicking on something about defending the Constitution. Like we've all been told stories about social change that just write mutual aid out of it. And the example I often use is the Montgomery bus boycott, which like I was taught in school. It was sort of like, this person doesn't give up her seat on the bus, and then these other people make these speeches and the law changes. And like what's written out of that is like thousands of working class Black women who like did all these elaborate food projects to raise money, to buy cars, to drive people around, and like coordinate people to walk in groups so that like, tens of thousands of people didn't use the bus for 18 months. It's like this giant food and transportation mutual aid project, and like also community defense mutual aid project. And like, that's the only thing that makes that thing happen. And it's completely written out of the story. And that I found that even people who are like, kind of supposedly critical teaching about social movements, even in college classes, don't include mutual aid. So I was just like, oh my God, this is so infuriating. I was like, there needs to be like a mutual aid 101, which I first made as like a website called Big Door Brigade, like right after Trump was elected. That was just like a mutual aid toolbox. Like these are examples of mutual aid projects from different kinds of issues. Like this is what childcare ones look like. This is what health, whatever. And then I wrote an article because someone invited me to write an article for some journal. I like wrote an article. I was like, okay, maybe this will be taught in classes. And then first it was like, we write this as a book, and just like, so to me, it's the same exact inquiry as normal life. Like, how does change happen? And the second half of that book is, some people have said, reminds them of a self-help book. It's very much like, okay, the first half is like, what is mutual aid? What is it not? How is it different from charity? Why is it criminalized by governments, et cetera? And the second half is like, what are common problems that come up in groups? And what are ways that we might talk about them in groups and create a group culture around it to like, try to like form a practice that can be more livable and work better and not fall apart. And then, the third book, Love in a Fucked Up World, is just deeper in that question. Like I've just spent 25 years in these movements watching our like very beautiful, much needed, brilliant projects fall apart because we struggle so much relationally. We are just like, we've all been brainwashed by living in a culture that's like brutal and cruel and racist and ableist and sexist. And we often like copy the capitalist experience of being at work in our groups. We treat each other like we're at a job. We like rush each other. We're like, it's okay to break my body in order to get this done. Like in a very like, we act like so outcome oriented. And, basic feminist inquiry would be like, what's going on in here? This work will be more sustainable for a longer time if at the end of each project or the end of each, campaign or whatever, we are more connected. We're ready to take bigger risks together. We have more confidence in our ideas and our relationships. We have more trust. And instead, most groups, that's not what's happening when people are working under dire conditions, which are what we're always doing because we're in so many disasters and there's so few people mobilized in our society compared to the needs that we have. People are like really at each other's throats and have like, most people leave the movement because of unresolved conflict that was painful. Like most people's burnout is actually just like because really painful conflict happened. And I think most people have very short lives in our movements. Like, I mean, this is obviously just totally anecdotal, but like my experience is that the average movement participant in the United States is somebody who like did something once, like they went to Occupy Sandy, or they went to, something in 2020 or whatever. They like joined something for a little while. They had some kind of really hard stuff happen and they never went again. Even if they remain having a politicized identity, carefully follow politics, have this as how they think about themselves, they're not doing any organizing anymore. And that is not okay. Like, we need people to come and stay and share skills and learn more and expand their solidarities. And so this book, I've been writing this book since 2015, and I've been like studying these questions since I was a kid because of just like my own need to like heal and deal with my own suffering and show up in my relationships in ways that align better with what I want. But like this question, like, I mean, I think we all, anybody who's long-term in movements, we all spend so much time just supporting ourselves and each other through these things, through conflict. And this book was originally like a much longer, like kind of self-help book for radicals. And it got so long that I had to cut it into multiple books. So this first one is just like the sex, love, friendship one. And like the next one is the like working in groups, procrastination, overwork, perfectionism, work avoidance, conflict in groups, like that kind of set of tools. But my hope with them, is that like, I put out the sex one first because, hoping that people will be like more bought in because it's about sex. Arguments are resistant to actually doing relational work, less and less so, which is wonderful. But mostly people get really outcome oriented. But I think people do act our worst in sexual and romantic relationships, and we do a lot of our worst damage when those feelings get stirred up. And so I'm hoping that like just by like having some of these tools and being like maybe recognizing that these are patterns that like are happening to everyone, it doesn't mean we're bad or that someone else is bad, and like could we have like some shared language to talk about the patterns and ways to support each other and ourselves? Like, I'm just like, even if most people don't read the book, even if some people just like screenshot some of the charts or bullet lists and like send it to a friend when they're struggling, and like, can any of this become an area where it's more popular to talk about it openly, and where we like do so in like a caring and loving way towards ourselves and others, instead of like pathologizing each other and like jumping to like apply a lot of like harsh labels. Like, that is my hope with this particular.
Yeah, I think you've sort of already answered my next question, but I'm just hearing you sort of to reflect back. I think a big question that's been circling around radical spaces for a few years now is around how to make them more welcoming and sustainable, rather than these sites of like deep and often community and project shattering conflict, like you just named. And I know that this book is an attempt to answer that question, right? Like, how do we fix this internal culture and create more spaces for people to grow and live within, instead of burning out and moving on? And I think that's, what we're going to talk about for the next half of this interview. But I noticed at the beginning of your book that you're sort of inoculating people against the fact that it's a self-help book. And I think a lot of people in movement spaces are generally very suspicious of self-help as a genre. And you talk about this a little bit in your book, but could you speak to that now? Like, why do you think that is? What are the reasons people are suspicious, and how do you sort of push back against that, or try to address that in this book?
Yeah, I mean, self-help is a terrible genre. The wellness industry is terrible. It's like, it's like so ableist, it's racist and sexist, and it's just like centered around upper class white people. It's very individualizing. It's like, all of your agony is happening to you individually, and if you just like take the right supplements and do the right exercises and do the right meditation and the right other regimes and have the right therapists, then like you can solve your suffering. And it takes all of it out of context. It's like as if we could talk about sex and romance and not mention patriarchy, or like as if we could talk about our dissatisfaction at work and not have a concern about capitalism and racism. Like, it's just like, it's bananas and really bad and very like victim blaming often. I think people feel that, and it's often very tied to like the medical and psychiatric systems that like label people as dysfunctional, when actually it's like there are like societal conditions that enforce certain kinds of norms about how our bodies and minds should be, that make some people criminalizable or disposable. So it's rough. And there's also like the kind of critique that I think is very meaningful about like sort of neoliberal self-care narratives, like that are like displacing the harms of an increasingly terrible set of conditions to live under onto like your individual, like you should make it your individual health regime that should take care of it. And it's kind of that personal responsibility narrative, that classic kind of term that was used by Obama so much and Clinton and everybody, as part of like blaming poor people for being poor. So yeah, it's a terrible genre. And I have like relentlessly read it my entire life because of really needing to find relief from the conditions produced by trauma and living in, a horrible culture. And what I hope this book does is take some of the ideas that I have found useful from that genre and put them in their proper context. Like put them in the context of an anti-racist, feminist, anti-colonial, disability justice orientation. And I'm sure there's ways that I failed at that. Like even just, it was just so important for me to like take the word healthy out of like the things I was talking about. Like they're like healthy and unhealthy relationships, these kinds of terms that are just have inherent in them so much psychiatrization. I think that's a word. And yeah, and to be like, is there, and I really tried to write it also to be like, there isn't a normal or correct relationship. And there are patterns of reactivity that we share culturally. And so how do we, and like some people may be like, I can't relate to any of these patterns of reactivity, but they're still happening to people they know.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like, even if you don't ever get attracted to people or date people or have romance, there's still probably drama happening, right, in your own social circle or activist group because others are doing it. So I wrote it to be like things to avoid when you're going through a breakup and things to avoid when you're helping a friend through a breakup. Just just people could have lots of different orientations to these things. And the patterns of reactivity are there, but they're not like cookie cutter. It's not like, because sometimes I think people use sort of a reductive identity politics in our movements. It's not like all women feel this during conflict or all Black people feel that. Like that's too simplistic, right? In reality, these patterns are mapped in a very complex ways onto like what our coping mechanisms are. One thing I'll say that I think is related to this is like, there's like just a little bit of, self-help lingo in our communities in ways that I think are actually really harmful, where like people are like, I found out that I'm triggered when people are late. So now no one can be late to see me. Like people use their a little bit of emotional awareness about their reactivity to try to control others instead of like, wow, I have a really hard time when people are late. I want to both let people I love know that and figure out how I'm going to take care of myself because people are just sometimes late. Like that is just part of, you know what I mean? Or could be something else. People sometimes use this or that word, or people sometimes, have this or that conflicting need with my need. But there's a kind of way in which like, I see this a lot with people's discussions of like personality types. Like if people take the test and they're like, I'm anxious or I'm avoidant or I'm a ENFJ or whatever, people will use their personality type to be like, I'm like this, so everyone else has to do this. And it's like, actually, that should be a place where we get to have insight and be like, oh, that reaction belongs to me. I'm carrying that. I may ask for support about it if I want to, but I can't like demand that everyone like become different because I have this wounding and this reaction. Instead, my job is to care for myself and my reactivity throughout my life, including by stating my needs, which nobody has to then agree to. Like that, for me, this is like a really anarchist ethic, like to be like, this is voluntary association. This is consent, is to be like, I want to learn about how I am and learn about how coping mechanisms that I got from our culture or from surviving difficult things are operating in my life. And I want to find out if I can have any more choice in that. Like if I'm like, I keep reacting in a certain way and it keeps being really hard or creating the same relationship with fractures that I would like to have a different experience next time. Like it's not about what we can get other people to do. I can't guarantee anything about other people. And actually I want to become somebody who can tolerate a lot of different ways that other people might be around me. Like I want to be somebody who can welcome new people to the group who don't actually know about pronouns yet and are like maybe fucking up my pronouns. And I can be like, you know what? I'm actually okay correcting them and teaching them or letting other people do that because I have so much support in my life and know who I am that like I'm allowed to let people learn in front of me and with me. And like, no one has to do this. I'm not saying, also I can be like, I'm someone who cannot be in a group where people act like that or whatever. I can, knowing my own level of reactivity and what I can tolerate, but not just being like, I'm having a reaction and therefore other people are bad. And that's the end of the story. That's not working out for us. Like, and I think for me, a lot of that comes from living in a culture that tells you that being a victim and seeking support from an authority figure is the most legitimate position. And so then really attached to and I see this happen a lot with how we use the internet. It's like the most powerful position I can have is like, you wronged me in the meeting, and then I go and post about you on the internet, and I'm trying to get the world of the internet to be the authority and say, that's right, you're wrong, I'm right. And actually it's very unsatisfying and doesn't work out for me, because it's actually not satisfying to stigmatize others and get others excluded. And also it's like, there's kind of never enough, approval in that kind of situation. But that mode of thinking that's going to make me feel better, that's from living in a carceral society. And like, I really want us all to instead have a little bit like, wow, I'm having a reaction, I'm having pain, I can seek my own support from loved ones, I know how to support myself, I can think about how to get myself out of situations that don't work for me, instead of thinking all the safety is going to come from outside. That to me feels like police society, and is really bad for us, and and relates to people in groups having conflicts and being like, we have to get the outside facilitator to come declare that I'm right and you're wrong. We get very like litigious. Even if we're using non-state solutions, we still have expectations of them that I think are like statist expectations.
Yeah. That brings me to, I wanted to share a quote from your book that I think speaks to the relationship between like addressing these interpersonal conflicts and abolitionism, right? And like, because I think, I guess I'm trying to like help connect the dots for people who are like, why are we talking about breakups? Like, this is like a movement podcast. Like, and so on page 280, you write, if you don't mind me reading it, and then maybe we could talk a little bit more about it. You're like, a military and police-centered ideology teaches us to look for safety outside of ourselves. If something is wrong, we call a cop, a parent, a teacher, or some other authority figure, rather than trying to sort it out ourselves and with peers. Using hierarchies to find safety, especially hierarchies that create and maintain illegitimate authority, is futile. Hierarchies based in illegitimate authority are the cause of all the most dangerous things: pollution, poverty, sexual violence, war, etc. Everywhere I see this pattern of authority seeking, even among people who want to get rid of police and militaries. When we are emotionally stirred and in conflict, we often want others to see that we are right. Even if we don't turn to official authority figures, many of us gossip or cancel or drag people on social media because we feel like we'll be safe if and when other people take our side. Or we want an outside facilitator or mediator to become a judge and declare us in the right, and we are unsatisfied if they won't take on that role. We've been conditioned to look for safety outside. And then just a few sentences later, you write, in our intimate lives, we play out the quest for external safety by expecting other people to make us feel safe and blaming them when we feel afraid or insecure. So I thought that was really, really helpful for just pointing out how these same sort of status dynamics play out in our interpersonal relationships. And I think some of the key concepts in your book that I think help people understand how this culture develops and how we dismantle it are related to developing a greater sense of self-awareness. And so I'm wondering if you, and there's a lot of different concepts, but I'm wondering if you can talk about some of them for listeners and outline the ways that they show up and cause harm, specifically in movement work. And, just to throw a few of these important concepts out there, right? You've written about the scarcity mentality, disposability culture, and what I'm going to call the accountability pendulum of reactions to harm, but you might have a different term for that. But I think like an overview of all of these different concepts would be super helpful for people listening.
Yeah, and tell me if I forget things. But I mean, one thing I just want to go back to what you said, like, if we're listening to a political podcast, why are we talking about breakups? I think it's really useful for us to remember that all of the social movements that we all admire, they all had proposals for every dimension of society, right? Like, this is what it should be like to eat. This is what it should be like to parent. This is what sex should be like. This is what we're rejecting the mainstream beauty norms. Like, all of our social movements are like very intimate. They're very intimately about changing our expectations, desires, interrogating our desires, like having new aesthetics. Like, it doesn't just operate on a level of like the kind of like macro scale. And especially for us who are anarchists, we're like, it matters how we treat everybody right now because we're making the new world. So I hope people can follow that. I think there's a very like sexist, masculinist, like kind of like relationship stuff. That's for girls. Mm-hmm. Like, let's get back to the real work. Let's plan our banner drop or whatever. It's like, actually we're not going to get this, our blocking the pipeline or dropping the banner or whatever it is we're doing done if we're like not able to have a meeting because everybody hates each other. And, like, it's really like getting the toxic nonsense out of our heads from this culture is vital. And in the passage you read, what I think I'm talking about there is we live in this culture of enormous disempowerment. I see this in groups a lot where people join groups and then are mad that the group didn't take care of their every need. And I'm like, it's like we're so institutionalized that we think of every group as like a university or a giant nonprofit or something when they're all, where they're scrappy, we're all unpaid in here, we're doing scrappy shit. Like we didn't think of everything, or we didn't do it all well. And people are like, I'm out, like this place is fucked up. And they've got, political analysis. And it's true. Their needs were not all met because like everyone in here doesn't know how, like we're just like guessing and trying to meet like a level of needs in our community that are unmet, that are so terrifying. So many people in our communities are dying of having their needs not met and of being, harmed. And so like, just like for me, the thing I love the most about like an anarchist ethic is like, if you and I and a bunch of people are in a group together and you guys want to do something and I don't want to do it, I'm like, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not doing that with you or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's like letting, like, it's like, or if you guys don't want to do something, I think it needs to get done, I initiate it. Like, or I at least like ask others to do it with me. Like there's an empowerment in anarchist practice that to me is really different from the cultural norm. And that's the same thing with this. Is just like, where have we imbibed different levels of disempowerment that then really harm our relationships and our ability to just like move towards what we want in life, like what we want things to feel like in a group or with a lover or with our roommates or whatever. Yeah, some of the concepts in the book that I think are, stand out, like one is the discussion of the romance myth, right? That like there is a set of ideas, a set of expectations about sexual and romantic relationships that are just so toxic, and a lot of people in radical movements are holding them just as tightly, and even people who are poly, and any of us can hold them just as tightly as mainstream. We have been fed them all of our lives and all these nonsense movies and songs and books and whatever, and they make people competitive about their, about partners. They make people treat people like they're very disposable, like we're shopping. I think the apps also kind of give us this feeling internally, like we're shopping for people and we're like, I'm going to trade up to a better one. Which usually means enforcing norms that are about like, body norms and class and race and gender norms that are, harmful and that ostensibly we don't believe in. And they make us think that our partners will like naturally like be able to read our minds. And so we have conflict with people because we think like sex and relationships just like flow naturally if you're in love, and that if it's not going well, it's like my fault or your fault, and we have to like fight about it instead of being like, oh right, of course we can't read each other's minds, and we don't exactly know what each other, we might not want the same things, and that doesn't mean anybody's bad or that one person's normal and the other person's off, or we do a lot of like pathologizing people if they don't want what we want. And socially, people ditch a lot, like people fall in love, and like it's like because we're told that's the most important relationship, people ditch all their friends, their projects, their politics, they move far away, they just go to Love Island, and you're like, why won't you call me back? Like there's a kind of like prioritizing those relationships over all else that makes them the most dangerous relationships. Like we're more likely to be killed by those people and hurt by those people. And they also make them often isolated relationships where we like don't tell others what's happening, or we like our life gets really small and focuses just on that one person. I mean, this is a huge cultural pattern leading to enormous isolation. It's part of why so many old people are so isolated, is because like as you age, your life becomes more and more oriented towards the couple or family form. And then if you either didn't do that, or if your partner is dead, or if they're like unsupportive and not a good, a good support system. Nobody should have a support system of 0 or 1, but a lot of people in our culture do. And the romance myth has a lot of responsibility for that. It's kind of like patriarchy tries to control us by first having us be in like our natal family, and then like move to a new family that'll be just the same control mechanism through marriage and reproduction or whatever. And there's just like this brief period where you're supposedly allowed to have like friendships. That's like kind of an adolescent thing that like the culture says isn't important. And I think queers know this, that it's actually like one of the most potentially liberated relationships because it doesn't have the baggage of family and romance on it. And so it's a place where a lot of people can get a kind of support where like someone really wants the best for you rather than wanting to control you, and where we might give each other more real direct feedback. And, obviously this isn't always true. People can treat their friends terribly, but I think the book has a really strong value to like counter the romance myth by like treating our friends more like lovers and our lovers more like friends, like trying to bring some of the devotion that people give to lovers and the loyalty to friendship, and trying to bring some of the like autonomy and care for others' well-being and movement away from sort of competition and scarcity into the lover dynamic. Yeah, I also talk a lot in the book about, the book is very much, stemming from my work in prison abolition and transformative justice. And there is this pendulum image that I use again and again in the book. And one of the pendulums I include, which I think you're referring to, talks about how our society kind of has two strong reactions to harm. One is to minimize it. That didn't happen to you. It's not a thing. Shut up, like blame the victim. It's not happening. And most of us have tons of experience of that our whole lives. And then the other end of the spectrum is like, that's the worst thing that ever happened. We have to imprison or kill the person who did it, exclude them forever. And very little in the middle. And really like actual accountability is somewhere in the middle, right? It's like, what happened and what would help this not happen again? And how can the person who, or people who did it, like figure out why they did it and stop doing it? And how can the person or people that it happened to figure out like the best possible way to move forward and still be able to participate in their life, even though we can't undo that this happened? Like, what support do they need to really be heard about like what would help them, come back into community if they feel like excluded, or come back into practices that they need, and that pendulum really relates to this kind of disposability culture I'm describing in the book, which I think has gotten a lot worse with social media. But it's based in living in a police and prison centered culture where we don't give each other direct feedback. We, are really afraid to get feedback. We're very defensive. We're very afraid to tell people if they're bothering us or hurting us. And so then we either ghost when it gets too bad, or full of resentment, or we blow up and there's a huge conflict. So many people I meet are like afraid to have roommates because they're like afraid of having a fight about the dishes. Like, we are so afraid of other people. And what it really is afraid of conflict. And like, people just want to my students, they'd rather do a project alone. They don't want to do a group project. Like, everyone's so afraid of other people and conflict and just managing basic differences. And it means that more people live alone in our culture than have ever in the history of any place, which is terrible for our finances. It means that we have to work so much more, and we're not collectivizing food and childcare and elder care and housework and rent. And so then people are like, I don't have any time to be part of social movements, So I feel like there's a lot of around like how disposability and like fear of being disposed of, and then like fear of people thinking we're disposing of them if we give any feedback, all of this like hurts us all the way down to like the most basic things about the dishes, or telling somebody, hey, when you didn't do your task in the group, it was hard for me, or hey, I don't like being touched that way, or like all like we don't like, we're so afraid to even know what we want, much less tell other people what we want and don't want, or like hear that they can't accommodate us. Like, a lot of people I know, we don't ever ask unless we know we're going to get a yes. Like, we avoid real conversations about consent, which I think is really harmful.
You mentioned something in the book actually about that, like the microscopic ways in which that shows up in speech with people, where you'll say like, do you want to do this, instead of would you be willing to do this, or if you'd be interested in doing this, I would appreciate it if you did it. And I think that's really, it's so subtle, but it's actually really helpful to understand that.
Yeah, or like, I want to go out for pizza, and instead of, would you like to go for pizza, or would you go, like kind of like just like, we're afraid to like just really want something or need something, and be open to no. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I think also a lot of people I know, when they first start doing personal work, they're like, I'm going to start asking for what I want, but then they're actually like terrified of anyone saying it's only okay if other people say yes. And it's like, we all have to learn how to hear no. And we live in a culture where we all say we want there to be less sexual violence. But if I can't even hear no from you about going for pizza, or, cleaning the kitchen while I'm gone, or, you know what I mean? Like, why do I think we're going to be able to have a negotiation about sex where we can really know if we want to do things or not and say it? Like, I just think we're not there because we aren't saying yes and no authentically, or even knowing if we want to most of the time about anything. To me, that's very terrifying.
Yeah.
The Beautiful Idea is a proud member of the Channel Zero Anarchist Podcast Network. Here's a taste of another project on CZN.
Hello, and welcome to We Will Remember Freedom, a monthly podcast of anarchist fiction. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. Hello, and welcome to Live Like the World is Dying, your podcast for what feels like the end times. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. Hello, and welcome to the jingle for both of my podcasts. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. You can find my podcasts wherever you get your podcasts or get them from the Channel Zero network.
You also talk about the costs of having a limited emotional range and sort of numbing out. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And I think at the beginning you also discussed the importance of doing emotional work. Why is that important to people? What are the costs of sort of not being in touch with your emotional experience? And why is that relevant to movements?
Yeah, a lot of people I know in our movements have learned the same thing that, I can recognize this myself, learned things basically to suppress emotions because they're a liability and to try to feel good all the time. That's very capitalist, very, that's very our culture is try to feel good all the time. Don't feel negative feelings. Those are bad feelings. Don't feel grief, don't feel anger. They'll make, our parents taught us this. Don't have a full emotional range. That's not acceptable here. You got a lot of unconscious nonverbal messages your whole life to not feel certain things, and then some verbal and conscious messages, right? Good girls don't feel this, people like you shouldn't express anger, people like you don't be sad, be cheerful, make your mom happy, make your dad happy, whatever. All these, whatever your deck of cards is that you were dealt, we've all got different combos, but all of us have limited emotional ranges from the cultural norms and then also from our experiences in early life, learning what was acceptable to survive and to get the emotional needs met that we had to be lovable. And as a result, we're missing parts of our emotional range. And then we live in a culture that's so relentlessly upsetting and terrible that we numb out. Cause what would it be like if I could feel all the feelings of walking down the street and seeing people living outside with open wounds and, seeing the extreme racism and who's working everywhere all around me in the businesses and knowing the ice caps are melting. And, if I could, knowing that I'm paying taxes on this bottle of water and it's going to bomb people in Gaza, I'm just wow, if we felt it all, it feels almost impossible, right? And also then I have to go to a job where I have to probably enforce something on someone, or I have to put my head down and have something enforced on me. And I've spent my entire life in school and in jobs taking it, and I think that it's just really deep. And so denumbing, trying to come back to life is one of our questions, so we can be more in touch with our grief and rage and our profound appreciation of life and an animal body and one another and the earth. The more alive we can be, I think the more we can be in this resistance together and make choices that are based in what's really happening now, that are responsive to what's happening now, instead of kind of things I was programmed to believe or do or feel, or how to be with others or how to disconnect from others to get by. And so, yeah, the emotional range question is a huge one, and it's scary. And, I think some people are I'm afraid to feel more. What if I feel more, than all of the stuff I never felt about these bad things that happened in the past will come up. Mostly, actually, those of us who've contained a lot of feelings, they're not going to explode out. That fear, I've had that fear when I was in my 20s and started going to therapy. I was oh my God, am I going to become dysfunctional if I feel any of this? Mm-hmm. And that's actually not, mostly our bodies and minds are pretty habituated. So we'll close it down pretty fast. I still really struggle to cry. And if I do cry, it's for less than a second, mm-hmm. And that's, 25 years of really working on it, so it's, and definitely having way more feeling available than I used to. But I noticed that when I'm able to access more grief, rage, all of these, taboo emotions, I'm able to also feel the other end of the spectrum, right? Capitalism wants us to be in a very small spectrum where we go to work all day and kind of numb out and get by and enforce the rules or get them enforced on us. And then we come home and check out with entertainment and, substances and stuff. And that, and the fantasy of the perfect body or the perfect relationship or the perfect home, whatever, all the kind of fantasy world of, if I had this, I would finally feel good. But mostly I just feel nothing, or I feel a little high for a moment when I buy something or when I go on this vacation for a moment of it. But mostly everything's kind of disappointing and numb. That's how they want to keep us. And we are these wild animals who know how to feel enormous pleasure and perceive through these gorgeous senses we have. And our job is to reclaim that so that we can get out of their little cage, and stop having our desires run by them, so that we end up thinking we want like SUVs and blood diamonds when really we want to feel connected to other people and have beautiful moments of solitude and big ideas and have gorgeous moments of connection and sex and affection and, feel our griefs together and have all of it more collectively. Right. That feels essential to me. And once we commit to that and just kind of get curious about the edges, I think a lot can happen. Just even being wow, where do I tamp down my feelings? Do I do it by breathing a certain way when they start to come up? Do I, what happens for me when I'm looking at social media and I see a horrible piece of news about the genocide or the ecological crisis, and then right away I see an ad, and then I see a funny meme, and then I see my friend's breakfast. What's going on for me when I'm tamping, missing chances to feel and being trained to cut off those experiences? And what would it be like if I gave myself any more space around the intensity that is available? That's the grief and the rage and the pleasure. What habits would I need to change to feel more?
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, there's a number of different tools in the book that are sort of around building self-awareness and emotional awareness. I'm wondering if there's any that you'd want to highlight that you think would be really useful for people to think about. Particularly, I think this question of what is the relationship between having more emotional awareness and self-awareness and having more capacity to understand the nuances and the differences in levels of harm, I think is what I'm getting at. And also, what tools do you recommend for understanding that?
Yeah. I really believe that phrase, hurt people. When I am in a story that I am the victim is the time I'm most likely to harm others. That is we think that people are out there being I'm going to get them. But most of us actually do the worst things to others when we are feeling like we're the victim and we have to protect ourselves or stop this person from being like this. And so I really recommend that tool, which a lot of people have said stands out to them in the book, What Else is True? And what this tool is you identify, you use it when you're feeling some strong thing. I'm telling a story, this group I'm in is so messed up, they did this, or this person is so terrible, she did this to me. Whenever they think this about me, whenever I use this tool when the world becomes narrowly focused on one story. Maybe it's keeping me up at night, I'm thinking about it a lot, I'm talking about it a lot, when we get kind of tunnel vision, I'm not feeling safe and I feel like someone's my enemy, or I'm so devastated by them, or they're out to get me, or this really bad thing's going to happen, or whatever, that kind of narrow focus. And what you do, the way the tool looks in the book is there's a small circle inside a larger circle. And so in the small circle, you put what you're feeling, I'm so mad at Sally and she's talking shit about me and she's ruining the group, whatever. And then in the larger circle around that, the first thing you do is you write what else is true about Sally or the group or whatever. Okay, I do remember that she's really committed to abolition too. She's been in this group with me for a while, or there was a time she brought me food when I was in the hospital. Anything you can remember about her, anything else, right? Or the group, there's other people in this group who also who don't, who support me, whatever. And the next page is again, the small circle you write what's keeping you up at night. In the bigger circle you write what do I not know about the situation? Because usually we're making up a story, we're filling it in. Sally didn't text back, and now I'm that's probably because she's mad, blah, blah, blah. Or, so-and-so didn't talk in the meeting when my proposal came up. That's because he thinks, so what do I not know? I don't know. Because Sally could be going through something with her partners. That person could have had a migraine. These, I don't know what's going to happen with this. So whatever I don't know. So again, I'm just trying to get some bigger perspective. The third set of circles, you write, again, in the small circle, what your strong feeling is. In the bigger circle, what else is true about me? I have a lot of support in this other group I'm in. I have been through conflicts in groups before. I am really excited about my new kitten. I have these friends who really love me. These two people in the group have stood by me on this, and I can talk to them about it. Anything else that reminds me that there's more going on in my life than this tunnel vision. And so you do those kind of things to kind of give yourself some context, which I think can really bring down some of the activation and make the situation with Sally right-sized in your life, and then also move from like thinking something so ill about this other person that you're willing to do something really sketchy. Like a lot of this book is about don't do things you're going to regret. And it's really easy in our groups to be like, oh God, sometimes there's an activated person. They do all this fucked up shit. This book is for when I'm the activated person or someone I'm really close to who I'm going to support. This book is not about trying to label other people. It's about like, oh, wow, we are all doing it. Even also, if we're in a group together and you're really activated, if I work on how that activates me, I am already helping the situation, right? Instead of you got activated, now I'm activated back and we're slinging arrows or whatever, or one of us is ghosting or we're playing out our patterns. So after you do those 3 circles in this exercise, the next thing is a list. There's a list form. And on the left side, you write things that I can control. And on the right, you write things you can't. So on the left side, it's like, I could take a walk right now. I can just do my tasks from the proposal and hand them over and we'll see what happens. Or, I can take a bath or I can call a friend. On the right side, all things I can't control. I can't control what Sally thinks of me. I can't control what Sally's telling other people about me. I can't control whether or not this group does this proposal. I can't control what happens to this movement. And you just rip that in half and you like burn or throw away or flush the part that you can't control. And then the final step of the exercise is you just ask yourself, is there anything historical here? Do I feel right now the way I felt when I had a fight with my sister when I was a kid, or the way I felt in my family, or the way I felt in school to be the only one with my identity? Or like, is this bringing out at that workplace where I was treated badly? Am I bringing anything into this situation? Which, short story, if you're having a strong feeling, you are from another time that I want to be sweet to that part of myself. And also just kind of for accountability reasons, I want to know that's happening, right? Like it's not all about Sally, even though it feels like it's about Sally right now. It's also about my mom, or it's also about that time at school. And so just like knowing that maybe, I'm going to eat my favorite food from that when I was that age, or I'm going to look at pictures of when I was that age, or I'm going to tell somebody in my life about some of those hard things that happened back then. And just like how it feels now, kind of similar with Sally. Like, just that this whole thing you could see as like it's both a self-soothing process to bring myself out of activation, and it's also a matter of accountability. I am out of my mind right now. I think the whole world is this one little thing, and if I act on that, it's unlikely to be aligned with my ultimate values of caring for this group, caring for Sally and myself. And so how do I get out of that tunnel vision and back to emotional awareness about what's happening for me and what my role might be in loving myself through that? Again, there's no blame or shame. There's action, like action for shifting my perspective just enough. We don't need to like get out of the feelings. It's like not about getting rid of them. It's just about knowing we're having them. Knowing we're activated is the difference between doing the thing and being like, wow, I kind of want to do that thing. I'm going to not press send right now because and so, and I'm going to ask a friend for help. I'm like, do you think this thing that Sally said is weird? Will you look at this email that Sally, confidentially, again, this is not about gossip, but confidentially, who can I turn to for support as I choose good action in a situation that is stirring me up and maybe stirring up other people in the group too. And all of that is normal. If we do anything that matters with others, we will experience conflict. And that is okay. It's a chance to actually heal and do something different than was done in our families or than is done typically in our workplaces or at schools or in our culture. Like, it's okay to run into this stuff with people. It just means you matter to each other. And then it's a chance to be right on about it.
Yeah. And I think you also talk about navigating the conflict phase and maintaining connection with people. And you also point out that the sort of typical cycle of conflict that we see a lot in romantic relationships can also show up in non-romantic relationships. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit and any other tools or reflections you have on staying in connection with people. Like how long do you stay in connection with people during a conflict, and when do you decide to call it quits? And I think you talk about this specifically in the context of romantic relationships, but maybe there's also stuff to link with non-romantic relationships as well.
Yeah, the romance cycle that I talk about in the book, I'm really hoping that people pick up for thinking about movement work, right? So the romance cycle is this idea that when we first encounter like a new person who's really exciting to us, a friend, a lover, or a group, sometimes we have like these really positive projections, like this is going to be the place where people finally get me, and this group works so much better than the other groups I've been in, or I finally have some community around this thing that I've been so alone in, or whatever. I love these people, or it's so fun, these meetings, or whatever. Or this person is incredible. They're going to make me, I think I'm going to feel love like I've never felt, or they really see me, or whatever. And that's really wonderful. And it also includes sort of like sometimes selectively not noticing things that don't jive with that new narrative. And depending on how big those positive projections get, like then that's how big the negative projections will be when we inevitably find out that this person is human, or they disappoint us, or this group doesn't provide our every need. And for a lot of people, that's a moment where it's like, I have to tear you down. I have to tear this group down, or I have to tell everybody how terrible you are. Like those disappointments, which are just normal in all relationships. Like people and groups are full of just like imperfections, you know? Everyone's trying out here and everyone's like making mistakes. And the kind of level of disappointment can lead people to really damaging each other in our communities and actually destroying groups. I've seen this, you know, so many times. And so the hope is that by just being aware of the cycle, we might be like, oh, I'm in the cycle. Okay. And my friends might be like, yeah, Dean, you're in the cycle. You're like obsessed with that group. Inevitably, they're going to tell you, oh, Dean, you're at the beginning. You can't see no wrong in this new lover or your new roommate or whatever. And later, I'm going to support you to not try to destroy them when inevitably they disappoint you. And just like knowing this about ourselves, I think it's just vital. And I think this relates to your question about when to break up with a person or a group, you know, roommate, anybody, right? Like one question we can always ask ourselves is like, am I beating my head against the wall? Like, have I tried a lot of ways to give this feedback and share my needs, and like, I'm just always not being heard? Or am I ditching too soon? You know, are we just in the conflict phase, right? Like, and one thing to ask ourselves is, am I somebody who has a tendency to bail really fast, or a tendency to like stay forever and like grind against this thing that's never going to change? And I don't think most people know the answer to that accurately. You got to ask your friends. A lot of us think that we stay too long, but we actually bail right away, or we think we bail right away, but we actually stay too long. So asking your friends, or like, you know, it's just like, we don't have a perfect self-awareness about this kind of thing. And your friends may differ, but even those conversations, if they're non-judgmental, might be really juicy and useful for being like, what did it feel like last time I left a group? Or have I left 10 groups in a row in a huff, you know, or and also written mean things about them on the internet? Or have I stayed in groups relentlessly, even when there was a dynamic that was like, you know, making my life harder or hurting other people in front of me or whatever? Do I speak up too little, or do I take on the role of the truth teller in every group and find something to like make a scene about? You know what I mean? Like these, and like no harm, no foul. Like we are just all bundles of reactivity, replaying the dramas from our childhoods over and over again. And then we're doing it in groups. And so there's a lot of live wires in the same room. Everyone's trying to get their emotional and social needs met. Most of it's unconscious. So just kind of how can we just know that, just come in knowing that, and then try to like see when it's happening. Like, wow, I think a lot about that person. I really focus on whether or not they like me. Is that balanced? Do I want to like try to draw some of my attention away from whether or not that one person likes me? Do I, you know, can I move away from being constantly paranoid that person is criticizing me? Can I, you know, and like, maybe it would help to move towards more relationship with them. Maybe it would help to check something out. Like, hey, I have this I'm wondering if you meant this when you texted it this way. You know, like, what do I need to do to try to bring myself into a slightly more sober reality when I'm, you know, lost in reactivity about the other people around me?
Well, I think these are such important questions. And I think one other thing that I just wanted to highlight that you talk about in your book is apologizing. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and like how apology can play a role in moving forward through conflict and what people are not getting right about apology a lot of the time. And then if there's anything else that you want to point out or highlight that we haven't yet touched on in terms of major concepts, would love to hear those too.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us have not had any satisfying experiences of harm and then real repair through apology and forgiveness. I just think it's very rare in our culture, especially in the relationships that mean the most to us. Like, your parents never apologize to you, or like most people break up with lovers and there's never a process of apology and forgiveness. It's just incredibly rare. Like, we live in a society, I think in part because we live in a settler colonial context where people had to break enormous ties to, you know, most people have a forced migration here, you know, on one level or another. People, you know, migrate because of terrible conditions back home or whatever, or because they're forced to through enslavement or indenture or whatever. And then we have like, you know, it's a really huge country, and people move really far away for jobs or school. There's a kind of like, I think what I notice is people in the United States are more willing to like burn a bridge with a family member than any other place I've ever been. Like there's a kind of like get really individual for the wage economy kind of vibe that plays out in our emotional lives, I think, in ways I don't hear people talk about as much as I would like to. But yeah, so we haven't had those experiences. And so it's really useful to just even be, and I think a lot of times when we're in conflict, people are just like, I need to be entirely right. I will only be satisfied if the other person is like, you were right about everything. And like, other than that, it's not, it's very binary. Instead of like, wow, what was my part in this? What do I wish I'd done differently? Can I apologize for that? Can I have enough emotional awareness that I grow to learn, wow, when I was in that relationship, or last week when I was in that argument, I was really reacting about X or Y, and I said some things that were mischaracterizations of that other person or that group, or you know what I mean? Like actually, and then being willing to admit that, right? An apology requires this humility of being like, I'm going to say it out loud that I did something that was not the way that I think I should have done it. And in the book, I talk about bad apologies. A lot of us give apologies that are like, I'm sorry, but, or, I guess you need to hear me say I'm sorry, or very short or very like, unwilling. A good apology is really like, I hear the way that I, hurt you, and I can say that back. Like I hear that made you feel left out or, unappreciated or whatever the words the person said to you are. And I can see that happened because I did this, and this is how I'm going to not do that again. Like actually like this is, like that's a real apology. And then I talk in the book about forgiveness and how hard it is to cultivate that, to want to forgive people in a culture that loves revenge and loves disposability. Like there's just so many that feels people like it's a juicy, delicious feeling to feel like revenge and hatred and all of these things. And so to just decide to actually figure out what it takes to forgive someone, to be like, they really hurt me and they're not going to do it anymore. I'm actually going to let it go and move on. And I know that in the future, it's possible that they may do it again, or someone else might do that to me, and I'm going to like figure out what boundaries I have to have so that I can, not have that happen, or whatever, like what things I can notice if it's about to happen again, or whatever, like what kind of are some of the conditions that would help me not have that experience again if that's important to me. And for me, like having real experiences of apology and forgiveness, like fundamentally changed my feeling of safety in the world. Self-generated safety that comes from my belief in my own ability to hold my boundaries and to make it through conflict with people. Because part of it is like a lot of us feel during conflict like this is the end of the world. I'm going to die if these people reject me or if I don't get heard. Because when we were children, we needed our parents or we would die, or our caregivers or we would die. And so we get so activated that we're regressed. And in reality, learning that we can have conflict, come through it, and even be closer from it with some people is enormously healing to that kind of terror that we all are like background living in, And I think it's really worth practicing apology and forgiveness with our friends. That again is often the lightest relationship for this, to be like, we're going to practice direct feedback. I'm really going to tell you if I felt pressured to go to dinner at the place I didn't want to, or if I wish you hadn't left the club with your date when I thought we were there together, or whatever it is. I'm really going to give you, or when you cancel on me, it feels like this. I'm really going to give and receive feedback with my friends and practice that muscle on all the little things, so that when the big thing happens, we know how to do it. And we know that every time you give me feedback and I listen to you, you find out that I'm trustworthy, You give me feedback and I know it's not that you're throwing me away. I find out that you're trustworthy. And like, if we do that a lot of times, then when we have a bigger difference, like we're more prepared to, try all those skills.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else that you want to highlight for listeners? Any other key concepts from the book, or sort of a final note that you want to share before we log off?
There is a tool I made with some people that I would love your listeners to know about. It's online. It's called 5 Questions for Cultivating Solidarity in Times of Political Repression. And it's just like made to be a very visual tool about some of the common things that happen when we hear these, like when the Atlanta RICO case came out, or these other moments of political repression, people often go to these kind of like very problematic liberal responses that undermine solidarity. And I'm just trying to get this one going around. I would love people to just like use it in their own communities. You can print it. You can, these images you can put on social media, like just trying to help as prepping for some of the heightening political repression that we're experiencing and will be experiencing. So I could send you a link that you can include.
Yeah, I would love that. Are you able to list them off the top of your head, the 5 questions?
Oh yeah, I can absolutely pull them up. So when we're verbally responding, we're talking about repression publicly or in the media or whatever, does this argument erase or ignore the ongoing violence of the U.S. colonial legal system or legitimize that system? So this is like when people say things like, this is not what our justice system looks like, or this is a threat to our democracy, or this is chilling repression that'll undermine our nation's values of free speech, like things that pretend that before this wasn't happening, or that there's not a long history of repression, and instead exceptionalize this. The second question is, does this argument contribute to a false narrative that universities and colleges are neutral spaces for the free exchange of ideas? So when people make a lot of academic freedom arguments, they often are like pretending that universities haven't always been settler institutions, places that are part of, building the military industrial complex and repressing resistance. The third question is, does this statement participate in dividing people engaged in resistance into good or bad, violent or nonviolent, thereby legitimizing criminalization of people using bolder tactics? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's obviously a common one. People using terms like peaceful protest or nonviolent protest, or saying things like, these people aren't criminals, they weren't damaging property, they were just speaking, that makes it seem like those who took on bolder tactics should be criminalized. You want to be aware of that. Question 4, does this statement reinforce boogeyman terms and tropes that our opposition is using to delegitimize our movements and justify repression? So, for example, there was a common kind of statement like, the indictment of the Stop Cop City defendants outrageously paints them as anarchists. They're not all anarchists. It's like, actually, what if we said, like, we're all anarchists, we're all terrorists, we're all, what if we stopped buying into the idea that, certain people are appropriately criminalizable, or certain labels make people criminalizable? And then the fifth one is, does this argument focus too narrowly on procedure, as if the repression would be acceptable if not for the procedural flaw? So this is really common. People are like, most shockingly, the prosecution was brought outside of the statute of limitations. It's like, when people get so narrow that they are missing that, all criminalization of resistance and all criminalization are bad. So we made cute little memes for each of those, and just really hoping to help people, especially people who are new to our movements, people who are entering our movements through we liberal frames, to stop, reinforcing these things that really undermine solidarity as people facing repression.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we have been covering the RICO case a lot, and we're going to be highlighting it again. There's an upcoming tour about that case, actually. And so it's very, very relevant what you're saying.
I think we're going to be seeing a lot more repression. I think we saw more under Biden, and we're going to be seeing a lot more.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time and for your insights and for your work. Really, really, really appreciate it. And I hope that folks will check out everything that you've done and keep tuning in. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for this conversation.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Beautiful Idea. News and analysis from the front lines of anarchist and autonomous struggles everywhere. Catch you next time.